Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast called Green Socialist Notes is about continuing to educate and organize for the eco-socialist program that my running mate Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. And today I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we've been petitioning. There's a pride event on the Capitol Terrace or Plaza, and good place to get petitions, better than I thought. After, the big news this week is since we last met, Biden dropped out and Harris dropped in, and she's getting a lot of support and enthusiasm. And despite that, most of the people at this thing, when I asked them to sign, they would sign, even though a lot of them said they're voting for Harris. So it was an easy crowd. The Pennsylvania Greens they need 5,000. They say they've got 11,000. I was told somebody, they don't know who, dropped off 10,000 more. They're a little suspicious of that, but they're in good place. So I'm not going to, talk about current events. You can ask questions when we get to that point. But I'm here today with Leila Hazou. And let me just show you her. She is the Pennsylvania Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate. She's a Palestinian American, and obviously she's got issues with the current administration as well as the Republicans. And so I'm going to let Leila tell you about her campaign and about her. And then, we'll go to questions and comments. Also, Jubilant X. Williams, who last year when I was at this event petitioning for the Pennsylvania Greens, was on the podcast. She'll be back. She's getting a charger because we're running off my cell phone hotspot and we don't want to run out of power. So hopefully everything will work out. So this is Leila Hazou, the Pennsylvania Green Party candidate for Senate.
Hi. So, I'm not sure what you want to know, but
One of them.
But I kind of decided, I decided to run this election against Casey and the Republicans, basically because of the stance on Palestine. Obviously, since I'm Palestinian American, the cause is super important to me. And after making call after call after call to representatives and senators, because I was a Democrat my entire life, always thought I was liberal. I was always leftist, but never really thought that I could do anything outside of just voting Democrat and participating in Democrat politics. So after seeing, let me put it this way, being Palestinian, I've known all my life what a fight this was. I've known all my life no one would stand up for us. So I was not surprised to just hear, the canned responses every time I contacted my Congress people or senators. It was always the same thing. So that's when I decided that, look, not only that, watching their response or lack thereof about Gaza, but also both of my parents are aging now, and seeing them dealing with healthcare, I was mortified. My father passed away last year, and before that, it seemed almost impossible for him to even get treatment because he was over 80. So it was kind of like once you're over 80, you're disposable, and they don't really want to treat you. So I thought that was a huge problem. And then paying out of pocket for everything he needed, not able to get help in the house, and then my mother. So healthcare is also a huge issue to me. So it kind of just, everything kind of galvanized together, and someone said, "Why don't you run?" And I said, "Okay."
And just tell a little bit about yourself. I know you're a businesswoman, and just, you moved to Pennsylvania from, I think, the New York area, right?
Yes, from New York.
Yeah, give us a little bit of that.
I actually lived and worked in New York, didn't live in Manhattan, but worked in New York City for like 14 years for a big investment bank, and just kind of got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. But I do have an MBA, And I just, that field wasn't really doing it for me. The corporate setting and environment after a while was burning me out. So now I have my own business. I make soap and candles and that kind of stuff. So I'm just a little shop owner in Milford, Pennsylvania now. We've been out in the Poconos for about 8 years and I love it. But yep, just have a little soap shop. But this kind of pulled me out of my comfort and I decided to run.
Okay, we just hooked up the iPhone that's providing the internet to our to the phone. So everything seems to be still working. That's good. So we kind of have a lot of greens around here. I'm wearing the Massachusetts Green Party hat, which is the Green Rainbow Party in Massachusetts. Works well at a Pride event because people think it's that Pride rainbow, but it was actually the multiracial rainbow of the Rainbow Coalition going back to Jesse Jackson. And in Massachusetts, they formed a party and then merged with the Green Party. So they're called the Rainbow Green Party in Massachusetts. And I was going to introduce Jubilin X. Williams. So why don't I do that when she gets back here? She's still working on that, getting that hotspot charge. So I would ask you this: did you hear Kamala Harris's speech when she came out of that meeting with? Yeah, what did you think of that? Because there was something of a different change of tone.
Well, to be honest, I think that it's theater, right? I mean, to me, yes, maybe she said a few stronger words about the situation, but when the first words are standing firmly behind Israel having a right to self-defense, when the ICJ just pretty much ruled, no, they don't. And then, sympathy for Palestinians as the afterthought. I'm finding it hard to believe it. I'll say that. The only thing that would show me that any of them are serious at this point is an arms embargo and sanctions, frankly. Stop sending weapons and money, and then maybe I'll be convinced.
Yeah, I agree with that. Until the U.S. starts, at least conditioning arms to let's get this ceasefire and hostage release and prisoner exchange done, and then let's tear down the wall for apartheid. And we can increase our sanctions. It should start with the arms. But the other thing she said, and I'd like your thoughts on this. I'm not sure the IGC said Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself. It just said you can't go off and commit genocide.
Well, I mean, this has been upheld many times in the UN, though. It's Article 51, right? Nation states have a right to self-defense. However, as an occupying power, you really don't. So they have always said that Article 51 does not apply to Israel in the occupied territories because it's illegal. Okay. So, and the actual oppressed or occupied people do have a right to resist. So Article 51 is, it's the closest thing we have to saying if they do or don't. Typically, they've said it never covers that situation for Israel because they are an occupier. They are therefore responsible for the safety and welfare of those occupied, which that brings us into a whole other thing now, right? With polio now spreading in Gaza and all of this stuff, and not providing inoculations. But I mean, so even beyond, if we do say they have a right to self-defense, I mean, at this point, we're kind of beyond that, right? So for her to keep repeating that also.
Well, that was my next question, because, as I understand it, within the 67 borders, Israel has, under international law, the right of self-defense.
Right.
But when they attack the occupied territories, steal land, kill people, they don't have a right to do that.
Exactly.
So then the question becomes, Harris is saying two-state solution. The Arab countries said, we want a timeline, we want UN military force to make it happen. What do you think the prospects of that are?
I think the biggest problem with a two-state solution is at this point, well, first of all, we know Israel doesn't want it. They've never wanted it. They've never come close to agreeing to it, except in pretense during the Oslo Accords, right? So there's never really been a realistic probability of that happening. The problem now is that, as the ICJ, again, in their advisory opinion, stated that they have put all these settlements in between. They've broken the land up. There's Area A, there's Area B, there's Area C. East Jerusalem. They've gone well beyond the 67 borders, right? And there's all these settlements. So how in the world are you going to make two states with that? So I think it's at this point, the ship sailed. If there ever was a ship. I don't think there ever was a ship.
Well, that ship wasn't there because the U.S. It gave diplomatic cover and military cover to Israel to violate international law.
Constantly, yeah.
The solution when people say two states, like the Arab proposal that was recently, is that, and in fact, I think this was in the International Court of Justice statement. They said you got to pay reparations, got to give the land back, and immovable property, has to go to the Palestinians. So that decision seemed to me to still envision a two-state result. So
Could if they were to comply, right? But we know they will not comply. So
Well,
that would be the only way it would be even somewhat realistic, is if they did evacuate from all of that illegally occupied territory, remove all the settlers and settlements, allow Palestinians the right to return, then possibly back to 67 borders at least, then it might kind of be possible. But I don't see Israel complying, not in the least, when they just passed 3 bills in the Knesset saying that they will never recognize a Palestinian.
I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement in South African, white supremacist apartheid government said that until we finally got sanctions, and we had to override a veto by Reagan. Congress did, and within a couple of years, Mandela was out, and they were planning elections. I believe we got leverage over Israel because they totally depend on us for diplomatic cover, totally for military. They'd be out of bombs now if we weren't providing them. So to me, the leverage is, the linchpin is the U.S. policy. It's got to turn 180 degrees around. And then, I lean toward the two-state solution because you got two peoples there, and given all that's going on, they're not going to live together in one secular state. So
I think they could.
They could, but I don't know. The racism of the Israelis that you respond is just over the
right. But
top. It's the worst in the world.
Right. But a lot of those people that have that deep of racism, a lot of the ultra Zionists, I guess, those people are a lot of them settlers and have dual citizenship. They can go back to their countries they're from.
A lot of them are from the U.S.
Right.
And some of the most virulent racists
exactly.
are from the U.S.
Exactly. So, but yes, I do understand what you're saying. I mean, I think I think it's a lofty ideal. And at this point, as a Palestinian, it's not enough for me, and it's not enough for them, because we've learned since 1948, history has shown us that they do not want to live amongst their neighbors, and that it's never enough land, right? They've gone into Syria, they've gone into Lebanon, they want to expand into Egypt. They've done that before too. So is it ever enough? What guarantee do we have they don't want to all of a sudden start spreading and expanding their borders again? They can't be trusted. So, and the U.S., frankly, can't be trusted to hold them to these agreements. So that's why.
Well, that's why we want Leila Hazou in the Senate. We need a different government in the U.S. I would remind you that 1956, Israel, Britain, and France invaded Egypt to grab the Suez Canal. And Eisenhower said, hell no, and got together with the Soviet Union. And they had a coalition, and they said, and the U.S. had a lot of loans to Israel. They said, we're pulling those loans out. We're calling them in if you don't stop. And guess what? Israel stopped, and France and Britain went back to France and Britain with their tails between their legs.
Isn't it
So-
ironic that the only presidents that have ever held Israel to account and made them stop were Republican presidents?
That's
Reagan
right.
and Eisenhower.
Yeah.
Reagan picked up the phone and said, "You're starting a genocide in Lebanon. You need to stop it and get out." And they did.
And his foreign policy advisor, James Baker, told them at one point, you got to stop the settlements if you want, and I forget what it was, but, you know, they had leverage and they used it. But since Clinton's been in there, you know, Israel, right or wrong, even no matter how wrong they are. So let's see if we got questions. And let me reintroduce Jubilin X. Williams. She was on the podcast last year when I was down here. So she's part of the conversation too.
I love your hat.
Thank you. I wore it last time.
I
too.
want one.
What do you think of the trend?
So,
Sound like a good idea?
okay, Frankie Lee says they mean to wipe out a whole generation. I think she's referring to the Israelis toward the Gaza Palestinians.
Well, they'd want to wipe out everybody, right? I mean, back when all this started, and I think it may have been, it was Goldameir or Rabin. One of them very early on said, the old will die and the young will forget. And what they didn't count on is that Palestinians will never forget, because our ancestors have lived this trauma, and it's, you know, they are one with the land, and this is part of their identity. So they didn't count on them remembering this long. So at this point, knowing that we will not forget, I think they just want to wipe all of them out. If we look at the targeting of children as it has been, it's pretty clear that they just want to destroy everyone, because if the children grow up, the children will be resistance as well. So they'll never be safe if Palestinians aren't safe.
Chris Blankenhorn, comment on Netanyahu's visit to D.C. this week. So we talked a little bit about what Harris said after the meeting, but what's your impression of the whole trip?
Well, I went to DC. It was about a 5.5 hour drive for me, but that's how important it was for me to be there, because I am so disgusted that that man was allowed in our house, in our Congress. And I'm even more disgusted once I saw later, because I was at the protest, that he had all those standing ovations and cheers. I'm mortified. I can't even reconcile it in my brain that a war criminal was in our house. To applause, speaking to applause and cheering rather than being arrested. So that, to me, and I say this with caution, but the way that I really feel is that day to me was probably one of the darkest in history, at least since I've been alive in this country. And to me, it was the death knell of U.S. empire. That's my view.
Yeah, I listened to the speech and I couldn't believe the lies. I mean, he was like Trump. He just making stuff up and, saying things that we've seen with our own eyes. Don't believe your lying eyes. It was incredible. The things he claimed, like if the only reason people going hungry in Gaza is because Hamas is stealing the food. When we know that Israel's been blocking the food trucks. And the right-wing zealots have been burning food trucks. They've been blocking food trucks that even Israel would let through. It's and this guy said it, what looked like sincere conviction. I mean, he's a
virtually no civilians killed in Rafah. Virtually no, or none. He said basically none. 24. Hundreds have been killed in Rafah in multiple massacres. It's insanity. How anyone can even take him seriously. He just wants us to move on.
And the way he said it, he's a pathological liar. He said it so you know, he was convincing if you didn't know the facts.
He's a psychopath.
Yeah. So, any comment?
I mean, I believe, what is the party called? Liquid? I don't know how to pronounce
Likud.
Yeah.
it. Liquid. And they're in a coalition with the Jewish party. I guess it's a coalition party that's in the Knesset right now.
Extreme rightist parties, yeah.
Okay, so they took a play from the Nazi era as far as the propaganda. That's how I see it. So when Netanyahu can go among Congress and say these things and say it with a straight face, I don't believe that he believes that. I believe that he must say that because that's what was done to the Jews in Nazi Germany, Austria, whatnot, Poland, and he's doing the same thing as vis-a-vis the Palestinians.
Netanyahu was a brilliant politician. Netanyahu has almost been out and his political career dead for many times, right? And somehow he rises from the ashes. And
That
this is what it
corruption.
is. He is a brilliant man, but his goals have always been since, the 80s. I mean, he talked about all Arabs being terrorists. Muslims want to kill everybody. Muslims hate the West. This whole concept of terrorism, the way we see it, is a Netanyahu creation. He's been trying to get us to go to war with Iran for decades. Every time he comes here, he tells our Congress that we need to go to war with Iran. I mean, if the man isn't transparent by now to everyone, it's just mind-boggling, right?
But now he has that coalition. I think it's called the Jewish Party. It's a coalition in the Knesset, and they have Ben Gvir.
Well, that's their
Ben
Likud. That's the far right of the Likud.
Okay,
party.
it's the same party.
I
Ben
think
Gvir is part of the
so.
same
Yeah,
party.
yeah.
Okay, I know that he's on that same line of thinking or speaking.
He's super crazy.
Yeah, he's worse than Netanyahu.
He was
Right.
actually labeled as a terrorist, and wasn't he in prison for a while?
I
Ben
know that
Gvir?
there was a
Or
far-right
Smotrich?
Israeli who had massacred a lot of Palestinians or whatnot, and there was a statue erected in his honor. And I believe that Ben Gvir was, I guess, honored him
Probably
somehow.
right there with him.
Right. So.
They're psychopaths.
Yeah, well, there have been a number of Israeli prime ministers that were terrorists,
Yeah.
like Begin. You know,
Begin
he
was,
was a big terrorist in the 40s against the British before the Nakba in 48. So, see what other
And I
questions?
believe that party or that organization that person who massacred all those Palestinians is part of has been outlawed or deemed a terrorist organization. Ben Gvir is connected with that organization somehow. I believe
Yeah.
he was a member. So
That's-
he's surrounded himself, Netanyahu has, with people who share his ideology and put them in the Knesset with him.
Yeah,
Or just
absolutely.
so he could get power. You know, if he loses power, he's going to be
Right.
facing trials for bribery and other forms of corruption. Yeah, the party you're thinking of, Meir Kahane, who was a Jewish Defense League in the
Kahane,
United
that
States. Bunch of thugs went around beating up people. Then they went to Israel and did the same thing. And they got banned by Israel. So this guy is from that movement. They just renamed
the one.
themselves.
Right.
Kahane, yeah.
Yeah. So
But like I said, their playbook is from the Nazi playbook as far as the propaganda. They've learned from that.
here's a question. Scout Trooper 164. Any views on Ukraine or how the Russian economy, according to Will Spaniel, is likely to cause Russia to lose the war? Wouldn't be shocked with how awful trade is getting. Yeah, that's an issue I've been working on a lot. Do you have?
I'll let you take that one.
Okay, well, there was an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. I mean, Russia's got huge inflation. They've reoriented all their production to the military, which means consumers don't have goods they need. The sanctions are not fully effective, but they are hurting Russia, particularly for consumer goods, because not only are they not getting goods in directly, they got to ship them through third parties, so sometimes it's more expensive, and they do get caught and sanctioned, secondary sanctions. the that raises the prices for those goods, and so that's one problem. The other problem is they got a shortfall of labor. You know, they put so many people into the front lines. Their studies, you know, by military analysts say they've lost over 500,000 casualties to Russian army. And even as big as Russia is, that's hard to sustain. It's 10 times what we lost in Vietnam. It's like it's 25 times what they lost in Afghanistan, you know, over 10 years. They've only been in Ukraine for a couple years, 2.5 now. So there are, you know, military analysts saying that, you know, Russia's going to keep on the offensive this year, but they're going to be out of, you know, things like tanks, armored troop carriers, artillery. Their artillery barrels are wearing out. Even though they're getting a lot of shells, they are producing a lot of shells, and North Korea is sending them to them. So they may be at their peak military power, which means that Ukraine, which is still catching up after the U.S. held them off for 6 months from any military aid, is getting stronger. So, you know, Ukraine's strategy is to hold out. And then if Russia's in, you know, economic trouble next year, there may be political pressure within the Russian elite on Putin to say, we got to cut our losses. That's what happened in Vietnam. You know, the U.S., it wasn't that we couldn't keep bombing the hell out of Vietnam and killing all those people, but the military refused to fight. I was in that. The peace movement was on the streets. And the elite in the United States said, this is costing us too much, not just in terms of economics, but status in the world. So all those things can come together. And, you know, in terms of trade, Russia's had to reorient its trade, you know, from the West to China, India. And what they do get from the West has got to go through third parties like Kyrgyzstan. So they're having economic trouble, and that could be a factor in them wanting to, you know, cut their losses. And then you get into negotiations. It's going to be, you know, Ukraine wants all its land back. Russia wants to keep some of the land it has colonized. And, you know, are they going to compromise on that? At this point, Ukraine, the people don't want, although the polling, now about a third of the people are willing to make some concessions. It used to be 10% or less because they're getting tired of the war. They've lost their power, and they've, you know, a lot of their people are getting, you know, wounded or killed. So, you know, some people are ready to, you know, compromise just to stop the fighting. So we'll have to see how that plays out. So I don't know. You want to add anything, Leila? No. Okay. So Scout Troop 164, I think, you know, to sum it up, Russia's under a lot of strain. And it really becomes whether their elites decide this is not worth it. And Putin has got us into a mess, a quagmire that they can't get out of. And, you know, Putin's thing is, everybody say, or the Russians say, and people that follow their line say, oh, NATO provoked Russia, which is like saying a man beating his wife was provoked by his wife. There's no excuse. But I don't think it was NATO at all. If it was NATO, why have they moved all those troops? Russia moved all those troops on the border with Finland, which just joined NATO, over 800 miles. It doubled their border with NATO and moved those troops near Finland down to fight in Ukraine. It's not NATO. What Putin's afraid of is the example of a democratic country right next to it, which could inspire his own people to rise up against him. I think that's probably the biggest motivation. And in a wartime footing, you can repress, you know, the opposition, which Putin has done. We know of the famous people like Navalny that died in prison. And I know from this Ukraine solidarity work I do with Russian lefties who left Russia because they couldn't survive there and they'd be called a foreign agent and put in prison. One of them stayed, Boris Kagorlitsky. He's very famous on the Western left. And he's in prison right now. And he's been imprisoned by the Soviets, by Yeltsin, now by Putin. He's a pretty principled guy, and he's in prison. So that's what Putin's really afraid of, you know, the people. if there was a democracy. I think that's why he didn't want the example of Ukraine next door. Plus, Ukraine was for hundreds of years part of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Empire, and the elites in Russia feel entitled that, they regarded Ukrainians as, sort of second-class Slavs, kind of a racist idea. They speak a funny language, a peasant language, Ukrainian. And, Putin has said it's just bad Russian, but it's actually a different language. It has the same Slavic roots as Russian, but, they're different languages. So anyway, I've been rambling on about Ukraine. Frankie Lee, it's Ukraine that will be freezing during the winter because Russia has taken out most of their power system. That's right, 80% of their power system, which means it's a real opportunity if the West would get its act together to supply solar panels, which can be installed very quickly, start doing wind generators, get batteries in there so they can produce more power than they are now without rebuilding centralized power plants, which can be taken out by one missile or a few missiles, which is what Russia has done. And I've been talking to people in Ukraine that the prospect of winter being dark and cold, it's partly why people are getting a little bit demoralized. It was really the U.S. holding that aid off that, really took a strike at their spirits. But now the worrying about what winter might mean is another strike.
Maybe I'll
Andrew Hager, Howie, take this with a grain of salt, but rumor has it Trump might be dropping out of the race after Biden stepped down. I don't know where everyone was coming from. I haven't heard it. I think Trump's ego is too big. He's got to stay in the race because he's trying to keep his ass out of jail.
There you go.
He's not dropping out. He's like Netanyahu doing all this crazy stuff so he stays out of jail. Sculpture 164. How do you believe things between Harris and Trump will go? Trump's campaign worsens and Harris slowly gets a win, or some other matter? You want to take the first crack at that? You don't have to. I'm always ready.
I actually don't know. And I'm kind of where I don't care. So you can take it.
Yeah, we got to
Whatever
talk
happens
about.
with them can happen.
We got to talk about your opponents in the Senate race, where they stand on Palestine. I think Harris is going to slice and dice Trump. She's smart. She's a prosecutor. He's a felonious fraud. And he's not that smart. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and his daddy saved him, and lawyers have saved him. I mean, him in a debate with Harris, I mean, she really gave a strong blow to Biden, if you remember, he was like caught, having opposed busing for integration in the 70s. And, he said he still doesn't think the federal government should, impose that. And Kamala Harris said, I was that little girl, that was in Berkeley. I'm from the Bay Area. I know exactly what she's talking about. She was, that was going on when I was going in school. I'm about 13 years older, but I know exactly what she was talking about. And Biden didn't have a response for that. Biden was slow. Trump is slow, but Harris is fast. And I think the base of the Democratic Party is energized. The young people, the black people, all the people of color, the women. And so I think she's already caught up to Trump. I think she's going to go ahead. And if she runs a smart campaign, I think Trump is toast, actually. And I'm hoping the Greens landslide so we can put that Trump is, craziness to bed. So I think that's where I think it'll go. But if I was a Democrat, I wouldn't, I'd work hard because you got to get people out to vote on election day. But she's got the enthusiasm. I mean, you look at the numbers, fundraising, volunteers, these Zoom meetings that break the internet, with tens of thousands of people. This is, just had nothing like that in a presidential race ever. So I think, it looks good. Now, in terms of the politics, I think Harris will be slightly better on climate, slightly better on Palestine. Question of how she'll be with regulations. Like, there's a lot of pressure for her to get rid of Lena Khan in the Federal Trade Commission, the first real progressive enforcer of, consumer interests. Kind of a Ralph Nader, a younger Ralph Nader. But there's a lot of pressure by big donors from tech industry for Harris to get rid of Lena Khan. So there are a lot of questions like that. She's a pretty conventional Democrat for Greens. She's not good enough on the climate, not good enough on healthcare. She still wants, the mixed public and private system we got now, which, where the drug companies and the insurance companies are ripping us off, and you can't get coverage when you turn 80, like Leila was talking about. But, let's put it this way, she's not nearly as bad as Trump would be. So, and I don't think the people are going to see that. So, either one of you want to add to that? Okay. I guess I should comment on where the Greens fit in on this. I'm still voting for Jill Stein, even though I disagree with her on Ukraine. I think she's got a hypocritical position. She's good on Palestine, but not on Ukraine. And Biden is just the opposite. They both not fighting against war crimes by war criminals. But I think, we got to vote because we need an alternative to this two corporate party system, because both parties are dominated by big business and workers and consumers and environmentalists and everybody else. We're not getting what we need. We're not getting real solutions. Green Party does offer real solutions, and real solutions can't wait. So that's, why I'm voting for the Green Party. But as I said last week, I think, the presidential race is not where we have leverage. I mean, they're going to spend billions on this race. And the Greens, we're just over $1 million for Jill Stein's campaign. So that's being outspent 1,000 to 1. And then we got to fight to get on the ballot. So, it's just, I think we maybe put a little pressure on the Democrats to be better than they are, but that's about the extent of it. That's why I keep saying we got to build our locals, elect more people to local office, state legislature, and then Congress. Congress is where we can have leverage. Even if we don't elect people, we can have leverage in the campaigns and make them come to us on the issues. And then, of course, electing people and getting the caucus in the House would be a big change. So I'm going to stop there. And before we go to another question, let's tell us about the people you run against. Bob Casey with the Democrats, and I hear the Republicans are real nutcases.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about the Republican because I've always been a Democrat, and I'm sure that the Republican disagrees with me on pretty much everything. But with regards to Bob Casey, I mean, there's just some fundamental things in Pennsylvania that drive me crazy about him is the fracking. He's not bothered by it. I think fracking is terrible. So that's a huge thing. But the fact that he doesn't really come out as pro-choice except when he has to, God, for years, he never even said anything about it or he was against it. But the way, just seeing that man too, because I actually confronted Casey when I decided I was going to do this and run. I told him to his face, and he was very smug and very arrogant. And I could see he wanted to push me about kind of being a terrorist sympathizer or whatever, this buzz catchphrase that they like to call everybody who disagrees with their genocide. So he was very dismissive about genocide, dead children, innocents being killed, no food getting in, babies starving. He was just very indifferent and arrogant. And I didn't like his policy before really anyway. So no, I just don't. I don't like him.
Yeah, that's been my experience with these elected officials of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. They're arrogant. They're dismissive of people unless you got money and some kind of connection. They're very different than they try to appear on TV and in their advertising. They're very, smug and dismissive of regular, ordinary working people.
And not as smart as they think they are.
Yeah,
They are not as smart as they think they are. They want to act smart, but they really are, because I was trying to give them facts and give them a second chance to say, I said, okay, so now at this point we had like 12,000 children killed in Gaza. And the special rapporteur had just come out with her report saying that it was genocide. So I, said, maybe, are you calling for a ceasefire yet? And when he said no, I said, well, maybe you don't know the current situation, with the special rapporteur's report just came out and these numbers and the famine numbers we're seeing. And I could tell that he couldn't care less, but he probably didn't know either. But he didn't know and he didn't care. So.
yeah, that's been my experience. These mostly elected officials, they're not only not smart, they're lazy. They've kind of stumbled into the position because they come from political families or rich families,
And him for sure.
and they don't work hard. Look at Congress. They're on a 6-week vacation. They just went on vacation again. They didn't get nothing done. It's it makes you angry.
I've had them lift content from my blog and use it in their speeches, in their articles. Their quotes in articles. I just called one out at the state level for a bill that she introduced. I had written a blog on data privacy. She wrote a memo, co-wrote a memo a year and a half ago. It wasn't until several weeks after I wrote my blog on data privacy that she introduced finally a bill. A year and a half after she wrote a memo addressing this data privacy bill. But once I gave her the language, it's happened over and over again. And the news media, they condone this because they go to them once they see my material on my blog. I'm 5-6 years in at this point, and I source all of my thing, or cite everything, and I tell you when it's my opinion versus when it's just my reflection or whatnot. And then the news media will go and get a quote similar to what I've written in my blog to post in there to ink in their in their rag. A pet peeve of mine. I'm so frustrated with the copycatting.
Yeah, think about the Green New Deal. We ran on that in New York for 8 years, and then AOC picked it up. We know she got it from her campaign manager, who had managed the campaign of a Green running for city council in New York City, calling for a Green New Deal. And she took that, and she's never given the Green Party any credit, never included us in any of the work she does around the Green New Deal. And she's one of the better members of Congress, from our point of view. So, yeah, there's a lot of disrespect for the real grassroots.
That's why I always like to challenge them to debate when it comes debate, so I can really know that this is your language. These are your thoughts. This is your thought process. Always challenge them to debate. I'm talking about in a formal setting. I don't want a quote from the newspaper. I want you to debate in real time so I can let it be known that you don't know what you're talking about and that staffers are writing your stuff, if at all. Your viewpoints.
So we got a question from the Green Garrett. How does Leila feel about the Green New Deal? With Pennsylvania being chosen as a sacrifice zone to fracking and now high fossil hydrogen, we need a good green transition to jobs and climate. And so I'll let you answer that. I just want to add to my Harris comment. When she was Attorney General of California, she sued the oil companies against fracking. Watch her to back away from that, I'm afraid. And this guy, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, the Democrats in Pennsylvania, if you want to oppose fracking and the environmental, mess it creates, Democrats are not going to help you. But what do you think about the Green New Deal?
Actually, I haven't seen it since they changed it because they renamed it, right? Let me see.
Well, the Green New Deal is in our platform. The Biden, his climate policies.
Yeah.
Well, he said, I'm not for the Green New Deal when he was running in 2020.
Right.
And Harris repeated him. But that was because the Republicans had demonized it. And instead of defending it and showing the Republicans why they were wrong, they backed off. And that's one of my other beefs with the Democratic Party is they don't know how to fight these fascists.
Right. And then but you're right. We need a good green transition for jobs and climate. But like in Pennsylvania, where I live in Pike County, it's a frack-free zone. Like they fought for that and somehow up there. And if you look at that area, like it's beautiful and the communities are thriving, right? And business is good and people want to live there. But I mean, it's just pretty simple to me. If you look at this stuff, nobody wants to live around that, right? When you see that, like, flammable gas is coming out of your tap and stuff, who wants to live with that? So, I mean, I need to read up on this since to see what they're talking about now as far as Pennsylvania. But all of that stuff, anything that has anything to do with fossil fuels and fracking, no, I don't like it. Hate it.
Yeah, one thing I know about Pennsylvania and fracking is they're using the frack waste, the wastewater, to de-ice roads in the winter and suppress dust on dirt roads in the summer. Yeah, and it's no better than regular water to suppress dust. And there are other ways to de-ice.
And it's probably causing all those potholes we have issues with in Pennsylvania.
I don't know about the potholes, but I do know that the frack waste is toxic. And it's not only toxic chemicals, it's radioactivity that is down there.
Why are they putting that on top of the road?
I think it's an accommodation to the, the drilling industry, the gas drilling industry. And
That's their way of recycling.
yeah.
That's not bio waste.
Yeah, right. Right. So yeah, if you're opposed to polluting the environment with frack waste and or fracking to get more gas out of the ground and burn it in the atmosphere and heat up the planet, Democrats in Pennsylvania are not your friend on that.
No.
Actually, Governor Shapiro had brokered a deal or whatnot in Western PA with a company and the union there. They make steel of some sort. I think it's called grain-based steel or something that is part of the infrastructure for, I'm not sure if it's for fracking or drilling or whatnot, fracking. But he just did that maybe in the last several weeks or last couple months. So there will be jobs retained at that company in Western PA that services the fossil fuel industry, extraction industry.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about Josh Shapiro is he's a big fan of vouchers, which is a right-wing scheme to defund the public schools and give some extra money to people who are already sending their kids to private schools. It's
Well, these Pennsylvania Democrats in general, the Pennsylvania Democrats, one of the things with Shapiro too that I hate is apparently we have a cop city being built right near Hershey. Right. A lot of people don't even know about it because they've just kind of started it. I don't even know if the building is started, but that's something Shapiro was all for, signed off on, all excited about it. So we're seeing these cop cities all across the country go up in blue states and blue cities. That terrifies me. I mean, I guess it's good for jobs, but then once it's built, it's not good for us.
yeah, but if you're going to deter crime, there are more jobs in, providing services to people who need help. Whether it's drug abuse treatment or mental health treatment.
Housing
or just
resources,
or
job resources,
or just basic material needs, so that
right.
People aren't reduced to stealing. So we got a question here, Magpie Kachi. How is the petition gathering going in PA? Will Leila get on the ballot, and what can we expect to see from her campaign from now until November?
Well, it looks like I am going to get on the ballot. It has been going really well. So we're hoping yes, and it looks positive. So what I want to start doing is I definitely want to go to Pittsburgh and Philly and start going around doing more events. I still don't have a manager, campaign manager at this point in time. We're working on it though. But if you go to my website, leilaforsenate.com, you can always put, like, if you have, of an event coming up, you can fill out the contact form or, the inquiry form or volunteer form, whatever, and put in there, hey, in this area, whatever, there's this event coming up that probably be really cool. And I'll see if I can get there or we can do something. So yeah, anybody that kind of knows of anything going on that they think it'd be good and they want to see me there or something, pop a note through the website and I'll see what I can do, because we're still kind of figuring out the management of the campaign. But yeah.
And might I add that as far as petitioning, we did do Pride in Harrisburg today. You see my ally button here. So we were out there. We're still collecting because you can never have enough. I was part of or a supporter of an independent campaign where I kept stressing early on this year that ballot access is a priority, because there's no guarantee you're going to get on the ballot, especially if you have so-called rival parties or opposition parties who challenge you legally and who have access to news aid, as I call it. You got to get on the ballot. You got to keep petitioning. You can't stop. And I haven't heard back from this particular candidate as far as this person's campaign, as far as if they'll get on the ballot or what signatures they've gathered. So. And this is a nationally known person. So he's running for a nationwide office.
Has to be president.
Yeah.
Cornel West.
Yes.
That was pretty easy, elimination.
I love you, Cornel.
What other policies do you want to speak to about before we go?
I mean, like I said, healthcare is really important. Women's rights are super important, especially with everything going on, and especially when the Dems keep telling us that they're going to codify road and they don't. So that's really important to me. But now I'm starting to get really concerned about homelessness. I know in Pennsylvania we don't have a huge problem, but we do have a problem. And now blue states are like making it illegal, and even parks, they're electrifying benches. And I think Kentucky after 11 so that people can't sleep on them. I mean, this kind of stuff is terrifying to me, and things that are important. Also, of course, the environment. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Everything is important, right? I mean, I think my big thing is anything that seems like common sense and seems compassionate is kind of where I'm at. I am not a politician by trade and by nature, but I feel like if you have a heart about anyone and everyone, and you have a little bit of common sense, I think we can do better than what we got. So
I'll tell you, in Harrisburg, homelessness is a big deal. It's a huge deal because we have overflow from homeless people coming in from DC, coming in from Maryland. When you get on that Greyhound, it terminates at Harrisburg. So they're coming in from DC. Through my work, through where I live, I interact with a lot of homeless people. They know me, I know them. I had written someone in the city council or whatnot, and suggested during lockdown that in order to provide more beds, why not open up these vacant gyms? Why not open up the YMCA or whatnot? It became a 10-part or 12-part series for the local newspaper. That did not reference me, and it's for subscribers only, because I recommended these solutions, and it became just a news story. It became a 12-part news story a month later. And
Did
I
they
never
do
got a
anything
response.
about
I
it?
never got a response as far as opening up the gyms and the schools that were vacant or anything like that. It was just news fodder. The subject was, not my solutions, or that I'm the one who brought them. I seem like I'm mad.
But it's like you do work for them and then they still don't fix anything.
No.
So, okay, take my work, take credit for it, but
Right,
fix the
and
problem. That's all. So, yeah, I am worried about that, especially now that you said that, because criminalizing homelessness and houselessness is not right. I mean, that's not where we should be as a country.
And in Harrisburg, by the way, a lot of, I think there's the assumption that because we're the capital of PA, that we have the resources. Our property tax base isn't very good, at least in the city of Harrisburg. I'm not talking about greater Harrisburg with all the townships and, you know, Pembroke Borough and whatnot. I'm talking about the city of Harrisburg, downtown, midtown, where we are right now, uptown, the Hill, whatnot. So we don't have the property tax base. The state capital doesn't get taxed. They don't have property taxes assessed on them. So we really don't have much but who lives here. And there are only so many homeowners here to begin with. So our resources are pretty strained. We have people sleeping. I'm telling you, I've seen people. I remember one time seeing a woman underneath a bridge for the train, the subway, getting assaulted. Because that's where she was sleeping. There was someone who got killed several months ago under that same subway. And I remember passing him, if this is the same gentleman. But homelessness is a big deal. This is very close to me. And they got to do something about this homelessness. And also the lack of housing around here. The rentals, they're up. There are a lot of people living doubled up in studios, inefficiencies. And the thing about this, if you have an eviction on your record, say goodnight to getting a spot even in the city. Say goodnight. You have to go all, I mean, that's one thing that I think at the statewide level, some of these candidates at the statewide level can do away with that eviction staying on your record, you know, for an eternity, you know, because I remember I had one on my record at some point. I wasn't even living in a spot. The person I was subletting it to stopped paying. And I didn't know this until it was too late. And so I got the eviction, even though I didn't even live there at the time. And it was difficult to get a spot when I was undergoing my divorce. It was very difficult. I lived in illegal rooming houses with, you know, opioid use, you know, people who were, you know, recovering from heroin. One ended up dying several months later from OD. The living situation is terrible. I don't want to ramble on.
Well, Jenna Colby, for those listening audio, she says it's bad in Pittsburgh and getting worse as housing continues to get more and more unaffordable for people. Yeah, I've been listening to an audiobook called The Wolves of K Street, and it talks about how since the 70s, the kind of regulatory state that was set up, you know, largely due to Ralph Nader, you know, environmental regulations, trade regulations. The FTC was formed back during the Wilson administration, but, you know, was gutted by the time the end of the Carter administration. And this is a book about how, you know, between the 30s and the 70s, early 70s, we had a, you know, Democratic New Deal kind of government that thought government action to help the people was part of what they had to do. And there was more balance between corporate power and the labor movement and civil rights movement, environmental movement, all those movements. In the 70s, business took over and we had corporate power and declining living standards. So housing, what was the solution in the 30s? Public housing. And after World War II, it became more, let's put the black people in the worst part of the town, you know, just poor people, segregate them, isolate them, instead of what it originally was for all kinds of working people. Mixed income, so that the poor aren't, you know, isolated. And, you know, that's the way they do it in Europe. So we got a solution. Who's talking about that? You know, except the Greens. So that's why we need the Green Party.
And that would help in Harrisburg because there are a lot of vacant units downtown because a lot of these law offices or whatnot, they're remote now. and they no longer need the office space, we can do that. We have a federal building on, I think, 3rd and Walnut that's been on the market multiple times. It's a high rise. There's at least 17, stories. Why not convert that into something?
I'm sure you got a housing authority in Harrisburg.
Yes.
So, it could take it over and make it mixed income so that the higher income people pay for the, subsidized rents of the lower income people. So it's not, a burden on the overall tax base. It's doable. The problem is, one of the things passed during the Clinton administration, the Faircloth Amendment, said you can't build any new public housing until you tear down some old public housing. They put a cap on it. So less than 1% of housing in the United States is public housing. You go to a city like Vienna in Austria, 1/3 of the housing is public. And it's a middle class, very sophisticated city. They don't have poor people like we do. Everybody's got housing. It's a solvable problem, except with the paid for, bought off politicians we got. So we run up the fork.
Everywhere else but here.
Hmm?
They'd rather send our money everywhere else but here.
Yeah, well, even there, our foreign aid is got strings attached. We'll give you this money if you do this for us. And a lot of times, what they want
Or
those
if you
people.
buy weapons back from us.
Yeah. Here's a loan, now buy the weapons, or here's a loan, now, buy from our
Buy the
corporation,
technology.
even though they could get a better deal from somebody else. So, got your caption up there. So, you got some final words for folks?
I don't think so. Look forward to seeing you though on the trail. Hopefully, want to meet more people soon. Should be on the ballot soon. So hopefully, I'll be making the rounds.
And you have a
And you meet
website up
folks.
soon where people can.
Yep, it is up. You've got it right there on there.
Okay,
He's
and
got
people
it on
can
the
make
screen.
campaign contributions there?
Yep, you can make contributions or just inquire. Like I said, send me a note. Also, same on social media, Leila for Senate on TikTok and Instagram. So,
All right. Got a last word?
You all, I'm not mad. I'm just passionate.
Okay. And I'll be back in Syracuse, New York next Saturday, and I'll be talking to Barry Bender, who's a Green Party candidate for the Congress, U.S. House of Representatives from New Jersey. And we'll talk about his campaign and how things are going on in New Jersey with the Green Party. And, we'll talk about the bigger news as well. So thanks, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next week.